Rowan Atkinson, the iconic British comedian known worldwide for his legendary portrayal of Mr. Bean, arrived on the set of Stephen Colbert's late-night show. In what was expected to be a rare and delightful guest appearance, Atkinson, who is typically a reserved and private figure, does not often participate in talk shows, which made this appearance especially anticipated by fans and media outlets alike. The audience welcomed him with enthusiastic applause as he entered with his signature grace, and wit, sharing a quick smile and nod before taking his seat opposite Colbert. The early part of the conversation was lighthearted, focusing on Atkinson's long career, his passion for cars, and his perspective on the evolution of comedy. But as the interview progressed, Colbert began steering the conversation in a direction that caught Atkinson off guard, bringing up recent controversies surrounding comedic expression and political correctness, referencing remarks Atkinson had previously made in defense of freedom of speech, which had stirred debate online and in media circles across the globe. Colbert, referencing a controversial op-ed that criticized comedians who push boundaries, challenged Atkinson's stance, asking whether his support for uninhibited comedy could be seen as promoting offensive content. Atkinson calmly defended his beliefs, stating that comedy serves as a critical mirror to society, and that limiting it too much would ultimately damage free discourse. He emphasized that humor should not always be comfortable, and that it must have room to challenge norms and provoke thought. Colbert continued pressing, however, implying that some of Atkinson's previous statements could be interpreted as being dismissive of marginalized voices. This line of questioning appeared to irritate Atkinson, who remained composed, but his body language signaled growing discomfort. He leaned forward and firmly reiterated that while he understood the sensitivity surrounding certain topics, he believed intention and context mattered more than blind censorship. The tension between the two men was beginning to rise palpably, and the audience, which had initially been laughing and cheering, fell into an awkward silence. Colbert attempted to lighten the mood with a sarcastic joke about how the Mr. Bean character would likely have no opinion on cancel culture, but Atkinson didn't smile. Instead, he replied dryly that reducing nuanced debates to cartoon characters was part of the problem. Atkinson then began explaining that his artistic choices, including his most controversial sketches, had always been rooted in a deep examination of human behavior, not malice or prejudice. But Colbert didn't back off, bringing up a specific sketch from a decade ago that he described as tone-deaf by modern standards. Atkinson countered sharply that comedy from the past should be viewed in the context in which it was created, and that judging historical content with modern lenses was a flawed exercise meant more to shame than to educate. At this point, Atkinson's tone shifted from defensive to assertive. He questioned Colbert's motivations for continuing to dig, rather than engage in a respectful exchange of ideas, stating that it felt more like a public interrogation than an interview. The conversation, which was now less an interview and more a philosophical standoff, continued with Colbert bringing up more quotes from critics. Atkinson responded by asking if this was how American media handled guests now, with a barrage of selective quotes instead of genuine curiosity. His words were met with a mix of stunned silence and a few awkward laughs from the audience. Colbert tried to explain that his intention was to reflect both sides of the public discourse, but Atkinson cut him off, saying there was a difference between balance and ambush. Atkinson looked directly at the audience and said he had agreed to be on the show to promote a new series that was deeply personal to him and explore thoughtful themes, but instead found himself cornered by repetitive narratives that didn't contribute to anything new. His voice remained calm but firm, and his British accent only emphasized the gravity of his disappointment. What followed was a short pause that felt incredibly long, as the host and guest stared at each other with mutual frustration. Atkinson finally stood up, removing the microphone from his jacket lapel and placing it neatly on the desk. Without another word, he turned toward the audience and simply said, "Thank you for having me," before walking off the stage in silence. The crowd, unsure whether this was scripted or real, clapped hesitantly while Colbert sat frozen for a moment, trying to regain composure. The broadcast quickly cut to commercial, but by then the moment had already been captured and shared across the internet. Within hours, hashtags like #AtkinsonStorms, out and comedy clash began trending on social media with fans around the world debating what had just happened. Some viewers expressed support for Colbert, saying he was doing his job by asking hard questions, but a much larger group sided with Atkinson, praising him for standing his ground with dignity and refusing to participate in what many viewed as an unfair character attack. Several comedians and actors weighed in online with notable figures, saying that Atkinson had shown poise and that the conversation around free speech in comedy needed more nuance, not more hostility. Media outlets scrambled to cover the incident from every angle, dissecting each word of the exchange between the two personalities. Entertainment blogs ran headlines about the clash, while opinion pieces flooded news sites arguing whether Colbert had crossed a line or if Atkinson had simply overreacted. Interviews with studio audience members revealed that many had felt uncomfortable during the exchange, stating that the atmosphere in the room shifted drastically when the tone turned combative. Some even said they felt let down, expecting laughter and insight, but instead witnessing a philosophical battlefield masked as late-night entertainment. Meanwhile, Atkinson's publicist released a short statement thanking the show for the invitation, but expressing disappointment in the direction of the interview. The statement reiterated Atkinson's respect for open dialogue, but affirmed that the actor felt his ideas were not given fair room to breathe without being twisted into controversy, for the sake of ratings or internet clicks. In the days that followed the incident, Atkinson appeared on a respected international podcast where he addressed the situation with his usual eloquence. He explained that he wasn't angry, but disappointed, that his thoughts on creativity and freedom were simplified into headlines, and that the format of late-night shows often left little room for real conversation. He added that he held no ill will toward Colbert, but hoped future interviews would prioritize listening over spectacle. He also reaffirmed his belief that comedy needed space to exist, without being constantly policed by ever-shifting standards. Atkinson's calm, measured reflection won him further admiration from fans and peers, and his series, which had been overshadowed by the drama, initially began to gain traction, thanks in part to the new attention his appearance had generated. Social media flooded with clips of his older work, alongside thoughtful commentary about the evolution of comedy and society's increasing struggle with complex discussions in public forums. Stephen Colbert, on the other hand, addressed the incident briefly during his next episode, suggesting humorously that perhaps his British guests were less tolerant of American-style grilling. The comment drew a mixed response, with some laughing it off, while others felt it minimized the tension and failed to acknowledge the legitimate concerns raised by Atkinson critics, noted that Colbert's attempt to deflect criticism with humor felt like sidestepping a necessary reflection about how guests are treated, especially those not used to American talk show formats. Some behind-the-scenes reports suggested that even members of Colbert's own production team had raised concerns after the taping, saying the interview went too far and didn't reflect the tone or values the show claimed to uphold. There were murmurs that the editorial team had considered cutting the segment altogether, but ultimately chose to air most of it, knowing the viral nature would dominate headlines either way. The wider entertainment industry took note of the fallout, with several late-night hosts and producers reportedly reevaluating how they approach interviews, especially with international guests who may not share the same media expectations. Analysts observed a growing divide between American talk show formats, which prioritize viral moments, and European standards that often emphasize depth and mutual respect. Atkinson's storm-off sparked debate in academic circles as well, with media studies experts using the incident to examine how modern media platforms blur the line between journalism and entertainment. The conversation around censorship, political correctness, and artistic expression found renewed momentum as more comedians started speaking out about the pressure to self-censor and the fear of being taken out of context. Atkinson became a reluctant symbol in this debate, admired not just for his talent, but for his ability to remain composed under fire and walk away when he felt the integrity of the conversation was compromised. Months later, the incident remains a cultural reference point cited in discussions about Artistic freedom and media ethics. Rowan Atkinson has continued his career unbothered by the controversy, earning praise for his thoughtful engagement with both art and philosophy. Colbert's show has since welcomed many guests but now seems slightly more cautious when addressing politically charged topics.